Living my bucolic life, we have a city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello. All right, ready to start a new project, and today we're going to be making another kind of a flared pant. Now I'm going to be using this pattern here. It's a McCalls pattern. There's the number, it's 8162. All right, now actually the pants I'm making is going to be like this, but without the bib overalls, just pants that are flared, okay? And what makes this pattern different from my other previous flared pants is that this one has a side zipper and the other one had a front fly zipper, okay? So I think it's going to be a lapped side zipper, which should be easier than a fly zipper. And another change I'm going to be making with this one is I'm going to be making the old style sewn in pleat definition or crease definition on the front with a double needle, so that's going to be good. And the fabric that I'm going to be using is this caramely chocolate covered twill. It's just a basic twill fabric. And it's nice and sturdy, so that should be really perfect for it. And I'm excited about this. This is a high-waisted pant, and on the back of the pattern you can see this is it, you know, plain on the front, a couple pockets on the back, belt loops and everything. And the style is actually coming in, and I'm making this one for my daughter Morgan, and I'm patterning it kind of after a pair of pants that she sent me a picture of that was on a Neiman Marcus site, which was like $700 or something. So we're making our version, and it's going to turn out great. So let's get started. Okay, I'm working on cutting out my pattern, and there's just two big pants patterns, a front and a back, a waistband, the little belt loop carriers, and a pocket. So there's not a lot of pieces. But when I'm doing my side seams, my outside side seams on both of my pants pieces, I'm extending out my cutting line by 3/8 of an inch so that I'm going to end up with a full 1 inch seam allowance on this outside edge over here. And that's for two reasons. One is this is going to have a side zipper, and so I'm going to do it as a lapped zipper. I'm not sure what the pattern has, but I'm going to do it as a lapped zipper, and I like to have a bigger seam allowance for that. Also, I'm doing this for my daughter, and she's not here as I'm making it, but she will come by at the very last moment. So I want to make sure that if there's any adjustments that I need to make, I have enough seam allowance to do that. So just adding it to that outside edge is the easiest for me. So cutting everything else out normally, just adding that to the front and the back pant piece right here. The first piece I'm going to start on is going to be the back. And there is a dart in the back that I need to mark. There's a couple circles here, which are for pocket placement. There is a circle over here, which is going to show where the zipper needs to open to on just one of the sides. And then there's notches. So, as usual, I am going to punch out all of these circles, sticking a little piece of leather between my pattern and my fabric, finding the circles that go with my size over here. I'm going to punch them out, and once I have them punched out, then I can just come back with my pen, which is a heat erasable pen, and mark it. So I'm going to do that for all of these dots, pocket, this one, and then for my notches, I'm just going to clip them. So with my little scissors, I'm just going to make little clips. And over here where I added seam allowance, I'm just making little clips out on my extended seam allowance. I can still use those spots to match up. So there's some down here and everything. So let me get all of this marked, and then I am going to make this little dart. Now on twill, there is one side that has more of a texture than the other side. So say this is one side, and you can kind of see all the diagonals on there. And the other side is smoother. And right now I need to choose which side I want to be my right side. It's kind of up to me which one, you know, but whatever I stick with, I choose right now, I have to carry through. And I'm going to choose to use the smoother side for my right side, and the more textured, diagonal, ridgy side is my wrong side. So I have to make sure that everything I do is with that in mind. So with these dots marked on here, I'm going to go ahead and draw the legs of my dart because it's easier for me to see. So to make my dart, I'm just going to, that pin is short, stick a pin in one dot and back out its corresponding partner dot. Push that through. Do it same thing with the next one on that line. Pull it through over here. And then again at the very point, I'm going to pinch it. Okay, so that's going to give me the little fold line that I need for my dart. And I have the little legs drawn, so I have a stitching line to follow. Start at the outside edge and come all the way in this way. I'm going to do that for both of them. And then while I am over at my machines, I need to serge all the way around both of these pieces. Before I serge it though, I'm going to press this dart seam towards the center back so that when I go to serge it, this dart is already pressed towards the center back in the right direction. So the next step I'm going to do is not part of this pattern. It's just a little extra thing that my daughter wants. And what I was going to do is to get that set in crease in the front. You want that it's stitched on the example that I have to look at. I was going to do the double needle pin tuck, but this twill is too heavy. I played with all kinds of tension adjustments and everything, and it's just not working. It's staying too flat. Okay, so I'm going to do them this way, which is a different version, and so I think it'll work just fine. And it's going to give me that little 1/16 of an inch. That's how thick it is. Little raised up crease in the pant leg. So this is in the back and the front. And so what I am going to do is where this dart is, fold along that dart, okay? And then down here at the bottom of the pant leg, I'm folding it in half, matching up the two edges. Okay, so these are the 2 points that are folded in half. I'm just going to lay it down with that matched up, and I'm going to iron a crease in it all the way so that down here at this side, they kind of flare out at the bottom. There you go. So down here at this side, these are matched. Up here at the dart, it's matched. And so at the end of the dart is where I'm pinching it to get this point, right? So I'm going to go ahead and iron this crease on both of these. These are the back pant legs. I'm going to just edge stitch this at a 1/16 of an inch, and you can eyeball it, you can use a narrow foot, you can use whatever. I'm actually going to be using this little special foot. See, it says 1/16 up there. It's for edge stitching, and it's got this little blade that pumps up and down here as a guide, so that when I'm sewing, going down this way, I can run that little blade right up against the edge, and it's going to help me get a very, very precise 1/16 of an inch line. But like I said, this is just optional. You can use whatever you want to, but I'm going to go ahead after these are pressed now and stitch this little crease from the very bottom all the way up to the bottom of this dart, and then I'll just go off the edge right there. This little point here will actually be underneath the back pocket. This pattern is a little bit interesting to me because there's something on here I don't understand. And that is, it has a side zipper, okay? It's very clear that it has a side zipper over here. But the front pattern piece has an extension as if you were going to put a fly into it, okay? So this is kind of just for looks, it seems like. They're going to have you do all these funky folding and pinning and basting and everything, and put stitching on the outside that looks like a fly, but it's not a fly. It's not a functional fly. It's just stitching, extra stitching. And I'm going to omit that. I'm making that executive decision right now because I'm putting those little creases and everything in here, and I just don't think it needs that much more busyness. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut that off right now. You know, if you are making these and you want to include that on yours, that's fine. I just don't feel like it, and I don't think it's necessary. So there you go. But what I need to do right now, while I have that side stitch foot on my sewing machine, is to go ahead and get this front piece stitched also. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and serge around each piece, and then we'll fold it in half, kind of like the other one, and press it and do that stitching before I mark anything, because I'm doing so much ironing that all of my marks from my heat erasable pen are just disappearing anyway. So I want to get that crease set in and get it serged first, and then I'm going to come back and mark all of the placement dots up here. All right, so I have this front piece done, and since there's no dart, it's very easy. It just goes all the way from the very top all the way down to the very bottom. And the way that I got that placement line is this is my wrong side, so I am folding that in half. I'm going to make this top point up here match, okay? And then down here at the bottom, I'm going to put these two points together down here, okay? Make this point match and stretch it out. And I'm just going to press this seam nicely and then stitch this at 1/16 of an inch, just like the other one. And then we'll be ready to move on. All right, so now I need to work on these little pockets. These are the back pockets. And there's two little dots up here on the fold line. They're at where the seam allowance is going to be. I'm just going to draw that fold line in. I can tell by the ridges I'm looking at the wrong side here. I'll do the same for this pocket. So turning towards the wrong side, I'm going to turn this upper edge under 1/4 inch and press it. So now that this is pressed under, I'm going to turn it towards the right side. This is my smoother right side, so that that fold line is up on top. And my little ridges, my fold here is visible. I'm going to pin it in and stitch it at 5/8 on the little sides here, which is in line with the little dot up in top, just to tack those in on both pockets. Okay, so I got my pockets. So what I'm going to do is trim just this upper part about 1/8 of an inch away, okay? And then this lower part, come in at the top of this fold and then come up. All right, so by doing it that way, you take the bulk out over here, but this part here is still going to be hidden in the fold when you flip it. And so it'll be nice that way. But before I actually flip them all, I'm going to come back around and serge around the bottom edge of here, just because I don't want it to come unraveled in the pocket in the wash. So let me do all these trims and serge that, and then flip the tops, you know, making sure I pull my corners out nicely and press them nice and flat. Okay, so up here on my back piece, I have these two little dots that are my pocket alignment dots, all right? So I'm going to put this pocket right up here against that. Now, I'm going to move this up. I've got this crease going underneath, and I don't want that crease underneath my pocket. but I didn't know exactly where to stop before, but now I do. And I want this crease to be centered in my pocket, so I want to make sure that that is how it is. Okay, so what I'm going to do is draw a little line down here with my heat erasable pen that shows where the very bottom of this pocket's going to be. And I'm actually going to pull out this seam until about 1/2 inch above this line and press this out flat again, but make sure I have this secured so it's not going to unravel the rest of the way down. So I forgot to turn my microphone on, so I'm going to do a voiceover and try to remember what I was saying. My pocket I have put on, and you can see that, and I am skipping the front pocket, so I'm not going to do a front pocket. And the instructions are showing to go ahead and sew a lot of the seams before you get to the point where you have a zipper. Okay, they don't show the zipper to the last step. But for me, it's a lot easier to put in a zipper when I'm working on a flat garment and not one that's, already sewn together. So I'm going to put the zipper in first. So what I need to do is sew the side seams together, my side front to my side back, and remembering that I do have a 1-inch seam allowance at my side seams. The dot on the side seam where your zipper placement is supposed to start. So what I'm going to do is below that dot, sew at a 1-inch seam allowance straight down. Here I have pressed my 1-inch seam allowance open up to that dot. The rest of the opening, I'm going to be looking at the right side because the two sides are going to be pressed slightly different. The overlap part, which is on the front, is going to need to be folded at the same 1-inch seam allowance so that it is in line with our stitching line below. I want that to continue evenly all the way up. So I'm going to flip my pants upside down so you can see the inside and carefully measure my fold so it's exactly a 1-inch seam allowance from the top all the way down to where it is sewed together closed at the bottom. Press that front fold so it's nice and pressed. It is a curved edge because it is on the hip, but that front part needs to be placed over the top of the bottom part because this is going to be a lapped zipper. So when I fold under the bottom seam allowance on the back side, I need it to be a smaller seam allowance than on the front so that it will fall underneath it. I'm measuring and you can see I'm making my bottom seam allowance about a 1/4 inch shorter than my top, my front seam allowance. A lot of times you only need to make it 1/8 of an inch difference. So because I gave myself such a big seam allowance to play with, I have a little more flexibility. So I am marking where I'm going to be folding my back piece seam allowance or fold allowance, which is at 3/4 of an inch. So it's a 1/4 of an inch different than the front. So I'm going to carefully fold it at that placement line and press it. So at this point I have both sides pressed, and if I just place the front over the back, you can see that it will overlap nicely. I'm going to use my double-sided water-soluble basting tape to put my zipper on. It has paper on one side that you can peel off. So I'm just going to run it down both sides of my zipper all the way from top to bottom along that edge. So with my seam allowances pressed and I have my double-sided tape on both sides of my zipper, I'm going to go ahead and work on doing the back side first. So I'm going to peel off the paper from the back side, and I'm marking down 5/8 of an inch from the top to show where I need that top of my zipper to be placed so it won't interfere with the waistband that I'm going to put on. Okay, so I have peeled the sticky paper off of that side, and I can just go ahead and place it underneath, making sure I get everything lined up so that the top of the zipper is at that line that I just marked, and lining up the edge of the fold alongside the edge of the coils on the zipper, and just kind of pressing it down onto that double-sided tape. Okay, so it's pressed down all the way down, and you can see the little metal stopper at the bottom, so that's okay. I'll just stop my zipper a little bit above that. That's not a problem, but I need to go ahead and stitch it from the top to the bottom right alongside where the coils are, using a zipper foot, a narrow foot, whatever you have along that side. I just realized that my microphone has been turned off while I've been putting this in. So you've just heard my attempts to voice over and remember what I was saying. It's kind of hard to think about what I was saying exactly and match it up with what my hands are doing. So anyhow, you get the idea. I wanted to show you, I stitched it all the way up, and when I got up to the top, the little tape wanted to come over to the side, so I let it and just continued to stitch up here. Okay, and while I'm stitching, I actually started this one from the bottom, came up, and when I was getting close to where the zipper was up here, you know, raise the presser foot, move your little zipper pull down, and that way you can continue up without having to make a bump around it. But that is done now, and now it's time to go ahead and put this side on. And doing it one side at a time is very, very helpful to me. So what I need to do is obviously flip it upside down, works for me. And I'm going to pull this tape off of this side now. Okay, so this is my side. The paper is pulled off, so all of this is sticky. And I can kind of see right here where it is in proportion to this. So this side is sticking out, you know, a little less than 1/4 inch from this side. So I'm just going to kind of roll it down, making sure that I keep it that same distance all the way up. Because this is a curved side, you know, it's got that hip curve on it. So you can't just lay it flat, you kind of have to walk it. And when I get closer up here to the top, I'm going to make sure that it is matching up with the top here, so that's in a nice line. Push the whole thing down very securely. Now I need to flip it to the right side and see what it looks like. Ah, my tape came off. Hang on. So I want to make sure that where it is, there is no zipper showing, okay? And that everything looks fairly uniform, and I think it does. Now I am going to sew this side, looking at it from the outside, from the right side. But I'm going to go ahead and stick a little pin over here at the top, holding the two sides together so that I'm going to make sure it stays overlapped nicely up here at the top. Okay? So underneath here, I can see that my zipper is right there, all right? And if I was to eyeball it, I would say the edge of my zipper is at about 3/8 of an inch. So what I'm going to do, just to make sure, is from the inside, stick a little pin straight through. Okay, so here's like the coils, there's that little guide line that they always have on a zipper. I'm sticking my pin through just on the other side of that guide line. All right, and here it is coming through right here. If I measure that over, that's going to give me 1/2 inch. So I know that where I need to sew this is 1/2 inch. Let me get this out so it doesn't stab me here. 1/2 inch from the edge, all right? So just so I can see it all carefully, I'm actually going to draw this line because it is somewhat curved. All right, and that's going to give me something to follow because I can't actually see the zipper as I go, and I've got so many layers of twill, and my zipper is flat on the top like I showed you, so I can't really feel it. Having this little mark there, I'm going to be able to sew it. So I'm actually going to start it up here and work my way down. Now remember that little metal part was up above where I had my opening before? I need to draw the crossover point above that. So if I can see, this is where that metal is. I'm going to draw the line coming across above it, right there. Again, so from the outside, that's all visible. So I'm going to go ahead, start up here, stitch it with it pinned closed, stitch it straight down, and then turn over and come all the way over to this seam right here. Okay, so I have sewn it down and over, and I took my little pin out up here, gave it a quick press just to erase my marks. And so now I can see I can open it, close it up. There's no puckers, everything's laying nice and flat. And on the inside, you can see my 2 rows of stitching going on each side of the zipper. So everything's going to be good here. Now on the other leg, there's not a zipper, obviously. So I'm just going to go ahead and pretend there's not, anything else going on, and sew up the 2 sides of my legs at that side seam. On the other side also, just straight up at the 1-inch seam allowance and press that seam allowance open. Okay, so because I did this first and we're changing the whole construction thing, it's gonna seem like it's a little awkward the way that I'm gonna be putting together the crotch seam and everything, but it's actually a whole lot easier than having to do the zipper last. So just with that said, what I need to do now is I'm going to go ahead and sew the inseams of my pants. So just matching up in each set, the front and the back, and stitch this. Now this is just a regular 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way down, and I should be able to go ahead and press this seam allowance open also. Just kind of put a seam roll inside and press it as I go so that I don't mess with all of this stuff. But I will stitch these at 5/8 and press them open on both of my leg pieces. Okay, so now I have 2 legs with my inseam sewn and pressed open. So I'm going to leave one inside out, and this is the one with the zipper here. I'm going to turn this one right side out. Doesn't matter which one, you do you. And I'm going to slide the one inside the other. So sliding the one that is right side out inside the one that is wrong side out. Give me just a moment to get this straightened out. Okay, so I have them right sides together here, and I'm just going to match up that center seam line and matching up the top lines, and there's a notch in here. Match up that notch on both the front and the back, and then I can just go ahead and stitch it. Okay, so what I'll do, probably put a couple more pins on here, but I'm going to sew it at 5/8 of an inch all the way around. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to overstitch on that same row a second time from the part where it starts to curve down, okay? So if you have a machine that has like a multiple stitch level, we'll just do that in there, But I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, here's the thing. I have a very high waist. This is not for me. This is for my daughter. She kind of has my body shape, but everybody's different. But for me, a lot of times this is too short, okay? And if you ever are in that circumstance and you got your pants all the way done and your waist is too high, or it's like giving you wedgies and everything and it's a real pain, just do this thing. Stick one leg inside the other, and say your seam line is coming right here. Well, from the point where it starts to curve, bring it down some. I usually bring mine down about an inch lower. So if like the store stitching or your previous stitching is like right here, make a new curve that comes down right here. That's going to instantly lower that crotch line, and you can just trim it out at that point and make things a lot more comfortable and fit differently. So anyhow, that's my helpful hint with that. But I'm going to go ahead, sew it just like I said, and then I'll show you how I press it. Okay, so now that I have, basically, this is stitched, and I have 2 rows of stitching on that same seam line right here. Okay, now between my notches, I'm going to run another row of stitching a 1/4 inch in, so about halfway between this row of stitching and the top one, just from notch to notch, which is, you know, where the majority of the curve is. And then I can come back and trim next to that row of stitching so it won't unravel. This is safe, and you don't have a lot of bulk right up here under your crotch. So I have everything done here, and above where I trimmed it, I press the seam allowance open, you know, just to that point. And from that point down, it's trimmed close to that second row of stitching, okay? Now the pattern is going to want you to come back and edge stitch all the way along the crotch line, kind of like blue jeans are. I'm not going to do that. I don't think that it would look that good on this pair of pants here. And when my daughter gets down to try them on, I want to have the flexibility to be able to adjust this crotch seam easily if I need to. And if it's edge stitched, I need to pull all that edge stitching out before I can make that adjustment. So don't want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready to work on my waistband. So the pattern gives you this piece number 7, which is a big long strip for the carriers. So I have just folded it in half with my right sides together and pressed it so I have that little crease, and I need to stitch it at 1/2 inch all the way up, and then I'll probably come back and pink that edge just so it's not quite as bulky and flip it right side out. Okay, so what happened is this twill is so thick it did not want to just slide inside out, so I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to cut myself a new piece, and I am just going to hem it in on itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is, at my ironing board, I'm going to press each side in about 3/4 of an inch all the way down, kind of like just making a piece of bias tape actually, and then push this through. Will that fit? This will fit in my bias tape maker. It's 2 inches wide. I'm going to run this through my bias tape maker. I'll be right back. Alright, so I've got my little bias tape folding mechanism thing here, which looks like this. And the maximum width that can go through this size, you know, they're in all different sizes, is 2 inches. So let me see if I can get it in there all the way. Thick stuff. Okay, there it goes. My little awl was what was necessary. So I can just pull it through, and it's going to fold it in 1/2 inch on each side. Let me just get it situated here. So my little end pressed. I'm going to pull it out a bit. Press it again, because trying to sew this and trim it and flip it right side out, it's just too thick and it's too narrow of a carrier, and none of my turners wanted to work. Even the thread method did not want to work, so there's always more than one way to do anything. This is how this is going to work for me. So now that I have it all folded out like this, with both of the raw edges folded together, I'm just going to fold it in half one more time and press it flat. Okay, and now I can go to my machine and edge stitch it on both sides, and I'll have a nice little 1/2 inch wide carrier. That was so much easier than trying to turn this thing. It's not even close. So now I'm going to take this piece, and I need to cut it into 4 pieces that are 3 3/4 inches long. And they say they're giving you extra, so I'm going to start marking it 1/4 inch in so I can cut off that little raw edge there, and I'm just with my pen marking where 3 3/4 is. 4 of them, and yes, they do give you quite a bit extra, so that's nice. So I'm going to go ahead and just clip these into their sections. So the point that these get sewn, and actually they give you enough to make 5 of them. So I might put one in the center back, we'll see. But the point where it's supposed to be placed is very close to where my front seam crease is and where the dart is in the back. So that's what I'm going to be using as my placement guide, just so I can make sure that everything's going to line up really well there. So I'm going to center one of these right above the crease here. And here. And in the back, I'm going to center one above each of these darts. And actually, now that I'm looking at it, I'm not going to put one in the center back, 'cause it doesn't need it because these are so close to it. So I've got my 4 carriers placed on those positions. And I'm just going to go ahead at my machine and just kind of stitch them on up about a 1/4 inch in, kind of a longer basting stitch, just to hold them in place so I don't move them and I don't have to worry about, you know, keeping them pinned and clipped in place. Okay, so now the last piece I need to work on right now is the waistband. It's a 2-piece waistband, and you interface one of them. What I'm going to be using is this. It says featherweight. It's actually, I would consider more of a mid-weight, fairly crisp. I'm going to use that to cut out one of these waistband pieces and fuse it onto one of them. All right, so here is my pattern, my piece that has the fusible interfacing fused to the entire piece. I didn't trim it. This is the right side. It's a smoother side. This is a smoother side. It is the right side, and this is the wrong side of just a regular piece. Okay, so what I need to do is transfer a lot of markings, and I am just going to, I punched out all the circles, and this square, there's a few that are on here that I think are only for the bib overall version, but I might have marked them anyway. Can't remember exactly. For my notches, I'm just drawing little lines like that. For the center front, it doesn't actually have circles, but I punched a couple through so that I can put that there and then draw a line straight across it. And I'm going to do the same thing and put CF there for center front and do the same thing for the center back. This little square in the middle here is where my side seam is. So I have my center front, a side seam, a center back, and this line here, which is connected by a line, is this other side seam because I have my zipper opening over here. So I'm going to need to make sure that that's going to line up at the exact side. So let me get all of this marked carefully. So I was just looking at the instructions, and they want you to use the waistband piece that is interfaced as the inside facing, and the one that is not interfaced as the outside piece. And I want to do the opposite, you know, so whatever I do, if you're following strictly the instructions, you can do the opposite. I just feel more secure with the interfaced piece being on the outside. So that's what I'm going to do. So let me go ahead and put this onto my pants here and match all the pieces up. So, okay, so I'm matching up my center front line. Scoot you up here with the very front. This dot here at the 5/8 is going to match up with the side of the fabric here. So like if I stick a pin right in that dot, it's going to butt up straight against the edge of the fold of this fabric. Okay, so I'm going to pin that one on there. And everything in the middle just lines up nicely. So I'm going to stick a couple pins here. This is just a notch which matches up with the other notch, so that is fine. This little piece right here is another side seam. So I'm going to line that up with the side seam here. And hopefully everything in the front will line up. Ooh, why don't you? Why don't you? Hang on a second. It looks like it's not exactly, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pull that out for right now and go on to the center back. Sometimes things work themselves out if you just ignore them for a little while. Ignore them with a happy thought. An optimistic thought that they will figure themselves out. Okay, so over on this side, the underneath side, this line here is going to line up with that edge right there, okay? So it looks like there is a little bit of easing I'm going to need to do. I'm not sure if this just stretched out of shape while I was working on it or if it's cut a little bigger. It doesn't really matter at this point. I've got my side seam matched up here, my center front matched up here. You can see there's the gap. So I'm just going to fold it in half this way, matching up what I have here. And that's going to give me a point, which is actually where that belt loop is, where it should match up pretty closely in the most natural way right here. I'm going to stick a pin right next to that belt loop. Oh, I'm going to stick it right on top of it, even though it's tough. Okay, so now on either side I should have about the same amount of ease, and that's not a whole lot. I can smoosh most of that in, but I am going to stitch it with this side down against the feed dogs and just kind of ease it in with the feed dogs as I go. So again here, if I'm going to pin this, I just bend it again, find that point, stick a pin there, and that way I can work the ease in pretty uniformly going across. But when I sew it, there's several steps and everything, but I'm going to be sewing it straight down this way with the feed dogs down here. I want to make sure this edge lines up with this edge, but I'm going to hold it pretty tight so those feed dogs can work any of that extra in. So once I get done pinning it all the way around and go to my machine, I will do that, and I'll use just a regular straight stitch. When I'm easing, sometimes I make my stitch length a little bit longer than I normally would, just so that the feed dogs are wanting to get a good amount of movement in there. Okay, so you can kind of see how I was able to work that ease in there on that side. You know, there's no big puckers or anything, just the ease worked in. So now what I need to do is turn it like this and press this seam allowance up all the way around, and then on the right side I'm going to push these carriers up and sew them at about 1/4 inch up here so that they are level with the top of this band. So there's going to be a little bit of a gap here. That's okay. I'm going to just sew it up there. Okay, so here we go. The little belt carriers are just leveled off up there. Everything is pressed up towards the waistband. And right now I'm going to go ahead and pin my fabric, making sure I have right side to right side out here, matching up all of the edges. I don't have to worry too much about markings on this one because the other one is already attached. And just get it all marked so I can stitch it at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So like on this part here where it's the under, I'm going to come up here. This is folded up on this side. I'm going to come straight up at 5/8 of an inch turn in. Now if you get a little bit unsure of where exactly to make that curve, there is absolutely no shame in drawing yourself a little mark of where that is. Come up to that mark and then turn. So I'm going to go ahead and get this connected and make that seam. Now over here on this side, again, no shame in making a mark here. If I put this little mark here, I should be able to direct my seam to go all the way. Now, this is very thick. It's going to be very thick, all right? And I'm Usually if it's a very, very thick thing I'm going over, I actually make my seam come just out a little bit. It's because as it's wrapping over, it has room to go around it without, you know, pulling too tight and puckering it in. So I'm going to draw a line from that dot I just drew to a point about 1/8 of an inch from that side. Okay, so you can see, but that way if my seam is there, I have room, if that makes any sense. So on this far side, I have it marked, and I have the bottom of my facing piece that does not have the interfacing. I have that folded up. I'm just going to pin it towards the bottom to keep it folded. And I have my little mark up here where I'm going to be stitching it and coming down. And I will do the same thing down here. When I'm coming down, I'm going to fold this up so that it's level with the outside one. Okay. And I can just add my little pin right, so thick, right there. Okay, so I'm going to start trimming this, and I'm going to trim the interface side shorter than the other. Even though it is the side that is closest to the public facing side, it is thick fabric and it is interface, so I think it's going to be fine. But this part is thicker, so I'm going to make them about 1/8 of an inch separate and also clip the corners. And then in here, if I do any grading, I'm going to grade this part here. I want the pants part to stay its full length, but I will probably come in here and take down some of this waistband, about that much, you know, a fat 1/8 of an inch off, just so that it helps to spread that bulk off up here. And like this corner, I can take some of that off too. So just trimming a whole bunch of things down all the way across. All right, so I have it sewn together up here. Everything's been trimmed, but before I completely flip it and press the corners and all, I need to do some understitching. So I'm opening it up as much as I can, and I won't be able to get all the way to the corners, but that's okay. I am, with my seam allowances, pushing up, and my topmost piece smoothed out over that. I'm going to come back and do a row of understitching right up here. Okay, just a straight stitch row of understitching right all the way across as far as I can get across the whole top of that waistband facing. Okay, so now this is my understitching right here, which is going to help me to have a nice fold at the very top. So now I can go ahead and, using my handy dandy chopstick, push out my corners the best I can and try to form those up and fold over where this is. I'm not even worrying about pushing this thick belt loop down. I'm just going to kind of leave it to do whatever it wants to at this point while I'm working on this facing. Let me get some clips. So the first thing I'm doing is working on the sides, and I'm pulling it in a little bit so that the little edge is more visible on the inside than the outside. Just put a little clip right there. And then I'm going to clip my top, basically come through, make a nice curve, especially where these belt loops are, and just kind of put some clips along the top so that it's going to want to hold the way I want it to when I come back and pin that bottom edge. And what I want is, you can see, looking at it from the inside, I see my understitching and I see the seam line here. Okay, so it's all curved towards the inside. So if I look at it from the outside, I don't see anything but a nice rolled top. So now that I have the clip set all the way across the top, what I'm doing is smoothing out this little facing area and folding it under. This little belt loop is definitely a thickness to deal with here. Anyway, I'll start at this, and this is my center back, and that's where I'm going to start, and just kind of move it out and put a little pin, and move it out some more and put a little pin, and just to get it nicely smoothed out, pinned down. And I am going to come back and stitch this down by hand on the inside, just whip stitch it in, and once I have that done, press it nice and smoothly. Okay, so this is my side seam with my zipper, and the longer lap goes underneath. The upper one is closed, and I have whip stitched this down and kind of pressed my waistband here. And so I found a button that I want to use, and I need to make a buttonhole. So I'm just going to put my button here, oops, and put a little dot on each side of it, because I'm not completely sure of what size I'm going to need because it's so thick. But if I measure that, it looks like a 1 inch buttonhole is what I'm going to need to push this through. So let me go ahead and get that all set up on my machine. Okay, so I made my buttonhole, and I actually ran it around the circuit 2.5 times just to make sure it was really sturdy, because if this is pulling a bunch of tension up here when you sit down and everything, I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to come loose. So I am just going to get my little chisel and cut this open. Cut open my buttonhole with my little chisel, because there are a lot of layers going on here. Okay. And then run my fingernail on the inside to pull any little loose threads out so that I can clip them off right now before they start to really bother me while it's being worn, or bother her, I should say, while it's being worn. I think this is going to work. So I'm going to push my button through. It works fabulously. And now I just need to place my button. So let me go ahead and zip my pants back up here, which sounds like a personal problem indeed. Okay, so now I have the pants zipped up. I want to place my button over here, okay, at the very edge, because that's where it's going to want to pull apart. If I put my button here, it's going to be able to pull like that and get misshapen. So if I stick my little heat erasable pin over towards the edge and draw around, I can see that's where my button needs to get centered. And I'm going to sew it right there. Now I sew buttons on in all kinds of ways using all kinds of knots. What I'm doing this time is I have a doubled waxed thread, and I made a big old hunkin' knot on the back of it, okay? And then I put my thread straight through from the front so that that knot is sitting right on top of that dot that I want my button to be centered on. I can then sew my button on top of that knot. Because this is very thick, if I have a little bit of a shank type of a spacing there, it's going to lay smoother and be easier. So I'm just going to try to let it sit straight on top of that big knot, centered it there, and sew the rest of the button on. And finally, with my last swipe through, I bring it through the button, but not through the back. Wrap it around a few times and pull it nice and tight to kind of secure that shank. And just push the thread and needle straight through it, straight through the little shanky threads underneath there. So that way, you know, it's a little bit of distance from the back, and hopefully, when I pull it really hard this way, the button is going to absorb the strain instead of the zipper down here, and keep everything nicely and in line the whole way.
They're very comfortable. I like the fit. Very high-waisted, which I love. Little flare leg.
Nice.
Cute. Business profesh.
I'm going to tip down to your feet. Feet.
Should I put on socks so people don't just get feet pictures?
No, that's okay.
Love to see how the pedal works.
Alrighty, so you have seen my daughter Morgan. She was only here for a little while and she had to leave. But the pants fit her very well. She liked them. She liked the high waist. I am so glad high waists are back in style. And the side zipper was good. Actually, we had a conversation and we decided that having the side zipper actually is more flattering, it seems like, in general, in our opinion, on women. But it was good. I think, though, you saw it fit her great and she could move around. But I think if I'm going to do this again, I think I'm going to use a fabric that has just a tiny bit of stretch in it, just to make it a little bit more comfortable, like a stretch, not stretchy, but with a little bit of give type denim or twill or something like that. But it's a great pattern, worked out well. Adding the crease sewn in is exactly what she wanted. So yeah, and it worked. It was actually pretty easy to sew. So hope you liked it. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.